In this video, we're going to talk about a particular effect, which is focus and defocus, or we can call it the depth of field blur and the motion blur. So essentially what we do is create a part of the image which is more in focus, so it's more sharpened, and another part of the image which is going to be more blurred. And this is to focus the attention of the viewer to a part of the image. And so this is going to be another lesson about PIXLR, and continuing with the tools here in the toolbar, we can find here the blur, sharpen, and smudge, and the focus, bokeh. So these are the two tools that we are gonna see in this video. Now in this image here, you already have a focus object here, subject in the foreground, and then we have the defocus or blurred background. Now this is an effect that you can get directly with your camera, so you can produce this effect with your camera, or you can do it artificially in post-production here in PIXLR or similar software. Now let's do a quick search together and let's see what we are talking about. Now basically these focus and defocus effects are due to how you set up your camera in terms of aperture and shutter speed. So this is if you search for aperture, you're gonna have some examples. Now, the more the camera here is gonna be open because you want to get more light inside and you want to brighten your picture, well, the more you're gonna have the effect of defocus and focus. So the smaller is the aperture, the less you're gonna have the focus and defocus effect, or again what is called usually depth of field. Now if you go here, you can also search for focus defocus. You will find a lot of graphics explaining to you how you can basically blur or not blur subjects in your picture. And then we have the shutter speed. Now the shutter speed, it's always about the aperture, but this time it's how fast it is to open and close the camera. So the more it's open, the more time it's open, the more light is gonna get in, so you're gonna have brighter images, but also well, the less movement it's going to perceive or capture. So essentially if you have a slow shutter speed, you're gonna have more motion blur effect, so it's gonna be blurred, and the faster is gonna be the shutter speed, well, the less you're gonna have the motion blur effect. So motion blur effect, it's about the shutter speed, but also about moving objects inside your picture. Now there is a reason, because in night scene you have a lot of like ghosting of lights, and you have also this motion blur effect. Well, that's because in night scenes the camera shutter tends to be real slow, so it's going to get more light, but in the same time it's going to not capture the movement correctly, and it's going to create this effect again, which is called motion blur. But you will find other information and a lot of examples in the web. Just to give you like a little bit of background so that you know what we are talking about. So let's get into the PIXLR tools. And first of all, I'm gonna use the blur, sharpen, and smudge. Remember to have a layer selected, and I usually create a duplicate, so if I mess up the image I can always go back without re-importing. So I'm gonna duplicate this. I can also right click and give this a name. Let's call this depth of field, or you can call it focus, defocus, whatever you want. Okay, and now let's start. So first of all, the mode. So you have blur, you have the opposite, which is sharpen, and then you have smudge. Let's start with the blur. And as usual, we're gonna work with the brush, so we're gonna increase the size and decrease or increase the softness. Now usually it's always better with these tools to have a little bit of softness so that you don't have like a really hard edge for the effect. So let's try to do now an example. If I click here, start to click with my left mouse, you can see that the difference between the focus and defocus is really evident, and it's a strong passage between one or the other. If I use a little bit of softness for the borders, this is going to be less dramatic, so I cannot really see there the passage between one and the other, so it's going to be better. Let's go back and do Ctrl Z, and so you can start to click and drag to brush here the effect just like another brush. So you can see right here we are still working with pixels just like in other videos. So we're gonna get that pixel, we're gonna blur it and blur it and blur it. So the more pixels you have, again, the more quality also this effect will have. So you can see that I'm continuing to defocus the background in order to focus my attention on the foreground right here. And also another way I can do that is to use the Sharpen tool. Now for the brush, well, you don't need to use the other in this case, and also leave the steps down to 0%. So these are the main two that you're gonna use, size and softness. And again, Sharpen is the same, so it's working with pixels, but it's doing the opposite. So instead of blurring out things, it's going to make them more evident, more strong, but don't exaggerate, otherwise you're gonna get strange things happening on the image. So yeah, it works to a certain point, and then it's gonna start to become a little bit strange, so don't use it too much. You also have a strength here that you can use either for blur and sharpen. And again, use softness, don't decrease too much the size, go slow, try to find the parts that you want to change. And then we have smudge. Now in this case, this is gonna simulate something more similar to the motion blur. It's not actually a motion blur, but it's kind of reminds of that. So I'm going to click and drag, and you can see this object here is looking like it's moving right now. It's like a moving object. So you can move the object, or you can move the entire camera. Now in that case, you probably need a bigger brush and a bigger area to smudge. So let's make this the biggest, and then I'm starting to click on the borders of the image, so we get this really motion blur movement of the pixels. So this is like I'm moving the camera, but if I open up another image here, let's see something, this one here. Let's say that I want to move the subject instead of the camera. So I can have a smaller brush, and then you can click and drag this. And you can see, you get that blur effect or motion blur. You can try that with people in the picture, you can try it with cars and so on. So you can experiment on that. Now let's open up a third picture, and we're gonna see the bokeh effect. Now we saw that everything basically it's about how we set up our camera in reality and how we can also adjust it in post-production. Now for the bokeh effect is the same thing. Now the bokeh effect is something that you usually get with a particular camera, with a particular lens. We can call it a lens effect. Now here we can create it artificially, and then we can also manage it using different modes and also different shapes. So the first mode here is gonna be the symmetric tilt, and you see that you can click here and rotate this, you can expand it, and you have these like continuous lines and dashed lines. Now the dashed lines is where the effect is gonna be more strong. The continuous lines is where the effect is gonna be, well, not so strong, so less strong. And you can also click and drag everything. So let's say that I want to blur only this part of the image. Okay, let's try to adjust it a little bit more. And by the way, this is a premium effect, so you need to have the premium version in order to apply it. Otherwise, you can just like preview it. So I'm gonna increase the blur just as before. There you go. And we're gonna click here and just apply the bokeh blur. Okay, now you can see that actually the part that it's in focus is inside those dashed lines, but you can always invert the effect. So you can invert the tool basically. There you go. So I'm just gonna adjust it until I'm happy with the results. And that's the bokeh effect right there. Now you have also radial. So it's just another way to find the parts that you want to keep in focus and defocus. Again, you can invert the focus and defocus. And then you have the linear. It's another one, which is gonna go like one way. So you can start with focus and then you can slowly defocus. And perhaps you should do this with the depth of the image. So, well, in this case, it doesn't look as well too bad, but it's not looking actually better than the others. But you can manage it. You can find the effect that you want. And then you have none. Now, in this case, everything is going to be in focus, and you don't have to invert it anymore. Now, between these three, I think I like most the radial, so I'm gonna use this one here. There you go. And just place it a little bit here. Here is the intensity of the blurriness, and then the bokeh effect. Once you have turned that on, you can also try different shapes, because this depends on the lens again of the camera. So some camera have these like hexagons shaped effects or blurriness effect, and then here you just adjust the intensity, the size, and you can also activate here extra bokeh effects if you want to exaggerate it even more. So this is gonna be it for this video. If you enjoyed, please subscribe to the channel. If you want to send us a little support, you can do it just by joining the channel as a supporter. And also check our other video courses and video guides that you will find inside. Write your comments, questions, suggestions, anything that can be helpful. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.